ownership and mortgages. So in this video we're going to talk about computing monthly mortgage payments, interest, compare partial loan amortization schedule, and solve problems that involve what you can afford and what you probably should avoid when spending for a mortgage. All right, and then understanding the pros and cons of renting versus buying, very similar to leasing versus owning a car in our last video. All right, a mortgage. What is a mortgage? It's a long-term loan for the purpose of buying a home. All right, in most mortgages nowadays, you need some sort of a down payment, which is the portion of the sale price that you're going to pay initially up front to the seller. The amount of the mortgage is the difference between those first two, the sale price and the down payment. So how much the home is actually going to be purchased for, and how much of that you're going to put down up front. Subtract those two, and that's the amount of your mortgage. All right, mortgage brokers, they offer to find you a mortgage lender willing to make you a loan, so they shop around for you. And then a fixed rate mortgage, the monthly payments is the same for all the years and decades even that you are paying for the house. And then variable rates and ARMs, or adjustable rate mortgages, those are the ones where the payments can change from time to time, usually upward as the life of the loan moves forward. All right, computations. Points. That's typically a percentage point at the time of closing. Each point is a percentage point, so like $100,000 house, if you had 1 percentage point, 1 point, that would be $1,000. All right, 2 points, 2 percentage of the loan closing amount, and so on. All right, if it's $200,000 house and you have to pay 2 points, that's instead of $2,000, that's $4,000 because it was a $200,000 house. It's 2% of whatever the loan amount's going to be. All right, and then the truth in lending disclosure, that shows the buyer the APR for the mortgage as time goes on, so they can see, hey, 2 years in it's going to go up, 4 years in it's going to go up again, so they know kind of how to adjust their schedule as time goes along. All right, and then an escrow account. A lot of times, if your bank or whomever you get your mortgage through, they will have set up an escrow for you to where you can pay taxes and insurance through that account for you. All right, we've probably seen this this formula before. It's very similar. I mean, the parts of this is similar, I should say. Parts of it will probably look familiar. There's that 1 plus R divided by N that we've been seeing a whole lot of in all of these formulas in this chapter. So it's showing up again in this section. There's that NT power that we've been seeing, but notice this time that's a negative exponent rather than just regular old NT. All right, and then R over N, it's very similar to one we've seen before. It's kind of things are flipped around a little bit. All right, PMT is the payment. It's the amount that we're going to have to pay each month when we are borrowing P dollars. All right, N times per year. Typically, again, that's going to be 12, like we've seen so many times with monthly loan payments. And T is the number of years. And typically for mortgages, that's 15 or 30, but it can be other values. But those are the two most common, with 30 being even more common than 15. All right, so let's see if we can do this. We've got a $195,000 home, and the bank wants you to put 10% down. 2 points at the time of closing, and the cost of the home is financed a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, 7.5% interest rate. So when we want to come up with the required down payment, well, we're going to pay 10% because it is a 10% down of that. So 10% of 195,000 is 19,500. That's how much we have to be able to afford to put down at the time. Okay. Now, what's the amount of the mortgage? Well, we're going to take that 19,500, subtract it from the 195,000, and that gives us the mortgage amount, $175,000. All right, how much do we have to pay for those 2 points? So 2 points, that's 2%. of the amount that we're going to have to borrow. So that's 2% of this 175,500. So 0.02 times 175.5. So 3,510. Now that 19,500 is paid to the seller, all right, and the 3,510 or 3,510 is paid to whomever is giving us the money for the loan, for the mortgage. All right, to find the monthly payment, we have to use that formula right here. So we're going to plug in all that information that we have. All right, the principal, how much we're going to have to repay back. All right, the R, the 7.5%, the N is 12. All right, T is 30. It's a 30-year loan. All right, we'll plug all that in. Again, you can plug all this into your calculator. Just be careful. I would put all that up there, up at the top in a parentheses, because again, that's the order of operations. So you can either put up a negative 360, but have it more multiplied out. But if you put it in there as a power, you will need to put it in a parentheses. All right, there it is. Everything put in at once. Notice I have an extra set of parentheses around here. The parentheses, that's not a good picture of it. The parentheses that I have is because there is subtraction down there in the denominator. All right, right there. So I have to make sure that I have that parentheses down there in the denominator. So that's where there's that extra parentheses right here in front of that 1. So anyway, hit enter. There's the 1223.63 roughly. Oops, and I see my error. I got something off. It's 175.5. I just put in 175 even. So anyway, there's the number, the 1,227 and some change. Right, they've got it rounded to the nearest whole on here. Just know that when you do this in your homework, a lot of times I'll have you round it to the nearest whole dollar. Sometimes I'll have you round it to the nearest cent. So again, just make sure to pay attention to the problem that you're doing the homework and round where it tells you to round. All right, again, if you watch that video on using Excel to make these, and this would be another one that I would put into that formula sheet, or sorry, your spreadsheet. Make one for that one, and just label that spreadsheet. Label that particular sheet mortgage. All right, the total cost, part E asks, what's the total interest paid over 30 years? So to do that, we take our total amount of payments. So we're making this $1,227 payment 360 times. So if I take $1,227 and I multiply that by 360, because that's how many monthly payments I'm going to make. All right, that's the total amount I'm paying to borrow this $175,500. So 175,500. There's the interest that I'm having to pay back on this thing. So roughly $266,220 in interest is going to be paid back on this thing. Okay, so I have to multiply that 12 by 30 to get 360 payments that we're going to make. That $1,227 every single time. Then subtract that amount minus the amount of the actual mortgage, the 175.5, minus the down payment. And that's how much money we're having to pay to borrow $175,000. We're having to pay nearly $100,000 more on top of it to borrow the money. I mean, we're paying, sorry, that doesn't sound right. We're paying $266,000 on top of it to borrow the money, but $100,000 more than what we borrowed to be able to borrow that amount of money. It's kind of crazy. All right, amortization schedules. When we are paying that a little amount of money each time. That a little amount of money compared to the total. What happens is part of it is broken off, and like that $1,200 payment, part of it is broken off and goes to the principal, and the other part of it is paying off all this interest that we're talking about in the last problem. All right, we've got all this interest to payment to make. So all of this $266,000. The majority of your early payments, the majority of this early $1,227 is going to be paying that $266,000, and just a very small, teeny tiny amount relative to the total amount will be paying on the actual principal that you owe. So when we are paying that off, it is amortized, and we have what we call a loan amortization schedule, which shows what's being going towards the principal and what's going towards the interest at each payment, each one of those payments that you make. Alright, so let's fill in one of these. So this is what one looks like. It'll have the interest payment and the balance in each one of these boxes. So we're going to start off with this one. We've got a $130,000 mortgage. All right, that's how much we borrowed, and our rate is 9.5%. We've got 180 payments, so it's a 15-year loan rather than 30 years. All right, and there's our monthly payment. All right, so let's look in our first payment how much it's going to go to interest, how much of it is going to go to principal. So what we're going to do, first of all, we got this 9.5% as a decimal, so 0.095, and I'm going to divide that by 12 because that's monthly. So that's 0.095 is yearly, divided by 12 is monthly. That's like R over N that we keep seeing. That's this amount. So not even a whole percentage point, about 0.8 of a percentage point per month. And I'm going to multiply that by the initial balance that I owe, $130,000. Okay, so for that first month, that's how much interest I owe. $1,029 and roughly 17 cents. All right, now what's my payment? Remember, my payment is $1,357.50, and I subtract off of that $1,029 and 17 cents. That's all that goes to my principal. The rest of it goes to interest. So $1,029.17 of that $1,357.50 is going to go to interest, and only that $328 is going to go to principal. All right, so there's a principal payment, there's the interest payment, and the balance of the loan. If I take the principal, the original $130,000, subtract this $328 that's left over after I pay off a little bit of that interest, all right, then I'm left with a new balance of $129,670 again. So I'm going to take that 0.095 divided by 12 again. All right, so there's that same rate, but now the second month it's $129,000. The balance is $671.67. That's the new balance. So that's how much goes to interest. So $3 less roughly. And I'm going to take that same payment. My payment is still $1,357 and 50 minus now the $1,026.57. So a little tiny bit more goes towards principal this month, the second month. All right, and it just keeps moving up like that. We multiply the remaining balance, the new remaining balance, after we make that leftover 330-ish amount
towards the principal every month, that'll adjust what the remaining balance is every month down just a little bit, and then we multiply again that by the rate and the time. Each time we multiply it by the 0.095 over 12, and we get that interest amount that we have to pay. Now it does, you do see it gradually, this amount gradually goes down, which makes this amount gradually go up because it's the same payment over and over. And eventually, it'll take a pretty good while, but eventually the interest payment will become smaller than the amount that we actually get to put on principal. And that's towards the the middle and the end of the loan, and until finally we're paying almost all principal towards the end. All right, but here's what a schedule looks like, and you see as we go down, that interest payment shrinks and the principal payment grows as we get more and more and more payments. Okay, notice we start skipping around right in here, but just so you can see the growth of the amount that we're applying to principal. So it's always that $13.57. If you add any of these two along the way, you'll see that it adds to $13.57, that monthly payment. But that's what's happening each time, because we are actually applying all of this column to the principal. All right, the amount that we're determining the percentage by goes down, and so we're getting less and less and less and less interest each time, and then we subtract that from the $13.57, which leaves a higher and higher and higher percentage. A higher and higher and higher principal payment each month. All right, what can you afford? A good lending institution will not lend you money if they feel you can't afford that house. They'll tell you you're going to have to, adjust and pick a smaller house or a different house or a different neighborhood. But 28% of your gross monthly income is what we typically would advise for a mortgage, and no more than 36% of your gross monthly income for your mortgage, your car payments, your credit card bills, student loans, any of that stuff, all together for debt. So 28 and 36 are the two numbers, and a big chunk of that 36% is your mortgage. It's included in there. All right, so here's just different gross annual incomes. If we take these numbers, 28% of these numbers, so you can see where it's coming from. If I take 28%, 0.28 times 20,000 and hit enter, there's 5,600. That's for a year. If I divide that by 12, there's the 466 and some change. That's where that 467 is coming from. So we're just taking these gross annual incomes and multiplying them by the 28% and then dividing that by 12, and that's giving us our what can we afford per month. Okay, the monthly credit obligations, if we multiply this 466, if I multiply that by 0.2, take the 0.36 instead of 2.8 by the 20,000, and divide that by 12. All right, that's where the $600 is coming from. Okay, and it's the same thing all the way up. You can see it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you can make $100,000 a year, then you can afford a $2,000 monthly payment for your mortgage. But not if you're making $40,000 a year. Okay, you need to cut that thing in half when you're dealing with your debt and your mortgages. All right, so let's say suppose your gross annual income is $25,000. What's the maximum amount you should spend each month on your mortgage? What's the maximum amount you should spend each month for your credit obligations? And
if your monthly mortgage payment is 80% of the maximum you can afford, what's the maximum amount you should spend each month on all other debt? All right, first two are very similar to what we've already done. Just take our $25,000, and you can do one of two things. You can go ahead and divide it by 12 to get the monthly, or you can multiply it by the 0.28, and then divide it by 12. Right? You can do it all at one time. So there's the $583 roughly that you can spend for your mortgage. Now, if we divide that by 0.28 and multiply it by 0.36, the two formulas, one of them uses 28%, one of them uses 36%. So if we just take our answer for the 28% for the mortgage, divided by 0.28, we've taken the 28% out, and then multiply by 0.36, we basically just stuck the 36% in the 28%'s place, and that's where the 750 is coming from. Okay. Now the third question is a little bit, you got to kind of pay attention a little bit better. If your monthly mortgage payment is 80% of the maximum amount you can afford, so it's not 100%. It's not. We're not maxing it out. You don't have to spend the highest amount that you can. So 583 was the biggest that we could spend. If we take 80% of that, just multiply by 0.80 or 0.8, we get 466. So that's what I'm spending on my mortgage payment. All right. Well, then what can we spend on other debt, like credit cards and a car payment and just other monthly expenses related to debt? So we take that 750 we got in the last problem, subtract the 466, which is all we're spending for our mortgage, and we're getting 284. Okay. So all the other things that we're going to purchase, credit card payments, all the other things, can exceed 284 because 466 is what we're spending.
All but 466 is 466 of it is being spent for our mortgage. Okay, so we got to make sure that we don't go beyond that 750 line. So that leaves 284 for all the other things. So, if you got credit card debt and you got, a car payment, there's just hardly any room for anything else in there. All right, renting versus buying. If you're going to rent a house, the benefits of renting, you don't have any of those down payments or points required. All right, you probably have a security deposit instead of a down payment, but that security deposit is typically returned to you once your lease is up or you decided to move on. That security deposit is, as long as you don't just completely tear the house up, will come back to you. You don't have to stick in one place. If you think you've fallen in love and you rent a place and you find out, 2 nights later that there's a train that goes through at 3 a.m., you usually can get out of that lease pretty easily, or at worst, you're there for 6 months or whatever, and you can get out of it. You don't have to be stuck there and trying to sell the thing for yourself. You don't typically tie up big money that could be invested in other places, and there are other things nowadays that do gain more money for you than a home. It used to be a home was one of the things that you knew would give you a return on investment, that it would increase in value, but that's just not the case anymore, especially after 2008. Kind of spooked everybody. All right, and then that's the mortgage payment's so big a lot of times that clutters up all the other debt, like we saw in that last problem. If we have a lot of debt to pay off, a mortgage and a big old mortgage doesn't help pay that stuff off. All right, some more benefits. It can, not always, rent is so high nowadays, but it can sometimes lower your monthly expenses because you don't have the other things that come with owning a home, the taxes, the insurance, the mortgage, and the upkeep. But again, mortgage does have insurance and things like that sometimes. A lot of times when you rent, you can rent a complex that has pools and tennis courts and all that stuff. The arm things that come into place, and a 2008 kind of bubble bursting. Those are the things that you gotta watch out for when buying a home, and you avoid that with renting. Typically, not always, but typically, if you're renting, a lot of times your lawn maintenance is included in there, and repair. No property taxes to have to pay, which can be outrageous in certain cities, and sometimes you have to pay city taxes along with county taxes. And it just generally costs less if you're going to buy a home. If you're staying in it for 2-3 years, it typically does cost less. Not always, but most of the time. All right, some benefits of home ownership. Well, obviously the stability, tax advantages, the deduction of the mortgage interest and property taxes on your taxes at the end of every year. The rent increasing over time. That does happen from time to time, and depending on what type of mortgage you have, there is a chance of that adjustable rate mortgage bumping up. But not like it was with rent. A lot of times with rent, every 6 months, if you're in a 6-month lease, that thing will go up. The freedom to remodel landscape. A lot of times with your leasing or renting, there's restrictions on what you can do, especially if you're in like a HOA type situation with renting. A lot of times you just can't do much of anything that you want to. All right, equity. That's a great way to borrow money. If you have a home that's worth way more than what you owe on the mortgage, you can borrow against that. And typically those rates are very, very, very low. All right, and then 7-year time frames, when you're talking about beyond that 2 and 3 year that we talked about before, the cost of renting. When you talk about rent, renter's insurance, and the loss of interest and a security deposit, all that stuff, that's typically grows to more than twice the cost of buying a home. So renting does, especially nowadays, renting is so expensive. If you can afford to buy, it usually is in your best interest.